Princess Isabella of Castile risked everything for a love that bloomed in shadows, but when the crown found out, her punishment made death look merciful. Buried alive beneath stone and silence, she vanished from history, yet the roses at her tomb never stopped blooming. What happened beneath that monastery still echoes through time. Like, if you believe love conquers all, subscribe for more forbidden tales, and comment if you'd have risked it all like Isabella. The stone walls of the palace whispered secrets that should never have been spoken, carrying the forbidden breath of a love that would tear apart kingdoms and bury innocence beneath layers of earth and royal fury. Princess Isabella of Castile moved through the moonlit corridors like a ghost already mourning her own fate, her silk slippers silent against marble floors that had witnessed centuries of royal blood and broken hearts. The year was 1468, and love had become her death sentence, written in stars that refused to acknowledge the boundaries between noble blood and common clay. In the shadows of the castle's eastern tower, where jasmine vines crept through iron bars and starlight painted silver patterns on ancient stone weathered by countless storms, Isabella met the eyes that would damn her soul and elevate her heart to heights that no crown could ever reach. Miguel Santos was nothing more than a stable boy, his hands roughened by rope and leather, his clothes bearing the honest stains of labor that no amount of royal perfume could mask or disguise. Yet when he looked at her through the twilight that separated their worlds, she saw reflected not the princess that protocol demanded, but the woman that heaven had created beneath layers of silk and ceremony, breathing and yearning and desperately alive. Their first stolen glance had occurred during the harvest festival, when tradition allowed the common folk to enter the palace grounds and present their tributes to the crown in ceremonies that had remained unchanged for generations. Miguel had approached the royal dais with a basket of the finest apples his family's orchard could produce, each fruit polished until it gleamed like captured sunlight, his head bowed in the required submission that separated peasant from princess like an invisible wall built from centuries of social law. But when the princess extended her delicate hand to accept his offering, their fingers touched for one electric moment that changed the trajectory of both their lives forever, sending shockwaves through bloodlines that had been carefully preserved for hundreds of years. The apple fell from her grasp, rolling across the marble floor like a crimson prophecy of the blood that would soon be spilled in the name of love and honor. Night after night, Isabella found herself drawn to the eastern tower like a moth seeking flame, where Miguel would wait in the garden below among roses that bloomed wild and red in soil that had been nourished by the tears of countless lovers who had walked these paths before them. His face would be upturned toward her window, like a sunflower seeking light, his expression carrying all the devotion that royal birth had taught her to expect, but never to truly believe. They spoke in whispers that carried on the evening wind, sharing dreams that royal birth had never permitted her to voice, confessions that would have scandalized the court and brought down the wrath of kings who measured love in political alliances rather than the beating of human hearts. Miguel told her of mornings when dew collected on spiderwebs like diamonds, scattered by a generous god, of the way horses nickered softly when they recognized his approach, their trust earned through gentleness rather than commanded through fear or royal decree. He spoke of seasons that changed according to nature's rhythm rather than court calendar, of harvests that depended on rain and sunshine rather than the whims of nobles who had never felt soil beneath their fingernails or known the ache of honest labor in their bones. She shared with him the suffocating weight of a crown she had never chosen to wear, the coldness of a bed surrounded by luxury but empty of love, the way her heart had learned to beat in time with duty rather than desire, each pulse measured and controlled like everything else in her carefully orchestrated existence. Their love grew like wildflower in forbidden soil, beautiful and desperate and doomed from its first breath, taking root in hearts that had been trained to value obligation over affection. Miguel would scale the tower walls using ivy that had grown there for generations, his calloused hands finding purchase on stones worn smooth by centuries of rain and wind, and the passage of time that made even the strongest fortifications seem fragile. In the small chamber that had once housed political prisoners, their bodies had left impressions in stone that spoke of suffering and endurance. They created a world that existed outside of royal law and social order, a sanctuary where love could flourish without the weight of crowns or the burden of bloodlines. Isabella would bring wine stolen from her father's cellar, bottles that had aged in darkness, while waiting for celebrations that honored treaties rather than hearts, bread torn from the royal kitchens, where servants prepared feasts for nobles who had forgotten the taste of hunger. Miguel would offer her treasures that no crown jewels could match in their simple perfection, a perfectly preserved autumn leaf that captured the essence of seasons changing, a stone worn smooth by river water that had traveled countless miles to reach her hands, a wooden carving of two birds in flight that he had crafted with his own hands during sleepless nights, when her absence felt like physical pain that no medicine could cure. For 3 months, their secret burned bright as a torch in absolute darkness, illuminating corners of the human heart that Isabella had never known existed in her carefully controlled world. Miguel taught her to see beauty in simplicity, to find joy in the texture of rough wool against her skin, to understand that wealth meant nothing if the soul remained impoverished by isolation and duty. She discovered that her laughter, when genuine and unguarded, sounded nothing like the practiced tinkle of royal amusement that had been trained into her since childhood, but rather like silver bells ringing out across mountain valleys, wild and free and utterly her own, carrying notes that had never been heard within palace walls. But palaces have ears in every wall, and secrets like theirs burn too brightly to remain hidden forever from eyes that watch for weakness and hearts that measure loyalty in gold rather than affection. The discovery came through Doña Esperanza, Isabella's eldest lady-in-waiting, whose loyalty to the crown exceeded any affection for the princess she had served since childhood, her devotion measured in years of silent observation rather than genuine care. Following Isabella through corridors grown suspicious with her absences, Doña Esperanza witnessed the lovers' reunion in the Eastern Tower, their bodies entwined in passion that royal blood was never meant to know, their voices murmuring promises that threatened the very foundation of noble lineage and the carefully constructed marriages that kept kingdoms stable. The report reached King Ferdinand like poison poured into wine, transforming celebration into catastrophe, with words that could not be unspoken or forgotten. In the private chamber where royal business was conducted away from courtly eyes, Doña Esperanza recounted every detail she had witnessed, her voice steady and cold as she described embraces that violated every law of noble conduct, kisses that contaminated bloodlines that had remained pure for centuries, promises of love that made mockery of political alliances already negotiated with neighboring kingdoms. King Ferdinand received the news like a dagger thrust between his ribs, his face transforming from paternal concern to monarchical rage in the space of a single heartbeat that seemed to echo through the chamber like thunder before a storm. The scandal threatened not merely his daughter's reputation, but the carefully negotiated marriage alliance with the Duke of Aragon that would secure the kingdom's eastern borders for generations to come. Treaties written in blood and sealed with promises that could not be broken without bringing war to lands that had finally known peace. In the throne room, where justice had always been dispensed with royal efficiency, Ferdinand pronounced judgment, with the cold finality of winter settling over the land, his words carrying the weight of absolute power and the chill of a father's broken heart. Miguel Santos was seized during the pre-dawn hours, when darkness still provided the illusion of safety, dragged from his family's humble cottage, while his mother's screams echoed across the village like the cries of a wounded animal watching her young torn away by predators. The soldiers showed no mercy to the woman who had raised the boy who dared to touch royal flesh, their armor clanking like death bells as they bound Miguel's hands with chains that had held countless other criminals who had overstepped the boundaries that separated noble from common. The execution was swift and public, designed to demonstrate the consequences of reaching above one's station. Miguel's blood spilling onto cobblestones that had witnessed similar scenes for centuries, each drop a reminder that love could not overcome the laws that governed kingdoms. But for Isabella, mercy and cruelty became indistinguishable, as her father devised a punishment that would preserve her life while destroying everything that made life worth living, a fate worse than the quick death that had claimed her beloved. The marriage to the Duke of Aragon would proceed as planned, political necessity overriding any consideration of her shattered heart. But first, the princess would undergo purification to cleanse her body and soul of the contamination that common blood had brought to royal veins. In the monastery of Santa Clara, where silence was worshipped as the highest virtue and prayer was measured in decades rather than moments, Isabella would remain until her wedding day, her spirit broken sufficiently to ensure future obedience to the crown and acceptance of her role as political commodity, rather than human being. The monastery walls rose before her like the gates of hell disguised as salvation, stone barriers that would separate her from the world where Miguel's memory still lived in every sunset and morning dew. The nuns who received her spoke in whispers that seemed to echo from tombs, their faces hidden beneath habits that made them appear more dead than alive, their movements slow and deliberate, as if they walked through water rather than air. Isabella's cell was bare, except for a wooden cross and a straw mattress that smelled of previous occupants who had come to this place to hide their shame or find their salvation. The walls so thick that screams could not penetrate to the outside world. But purification became impossible when the princess refused to renounce her love. Even as Miguel's blood dried brown on the executioner's block, and his name became forbidden in the palace where she had once laughed and dreamed of futures that would never come to pass. Night after night, she spoke his name like an incantation against forgetting, her voice carrying through stone walls that had witnessed countless acts of spiritual mortification, each syllable a rebellion against the silence that was supposed to heal her wounded soul. The nuns, sworn to silence themselves, could only listen as royal grief transformed into something harder and more dangerous than rebellion. Absolute refusal to continue living according to others' will, a determination that burned brighter than any flame they had seen in their years of tending to broken spirits. Mother Superior Agatha tried every method of spiritual discipline known to the order, from fasting that left Isabella weak as a shadow, to prayers that stretched through entire nights until dawn, broke over walls that seemed to grow higher with each passing day. But the princess's love proved stronger than hunger, more enduring than exhaustion, more powerful than any force the church could bring to bear against a heart that had tasted freedom and would not accept bondage. Isabella's refusal to repent became legendary among the sisters, her defiance spreading through the monastery like a fever that infected even the most devout with questions about the nature of love and duty and the price that God demanded for salvation. The final punishment was delivered with the cold logic that had made King Ferdinand legendary throughout Europe for his political acumen and his ability to solve problems that other rulers found impossible to resolve. If Isabella insisted on remaining spiritually dead to duty and honor, then physical death would complete the metaphor, allowing her to achieve in the grave the purity that life had failed to provide. But royal blood could not simply be spilled like that of common criminals, for even in death, appearances had to be maintained and proper forms observed. Instead, Isabella would be entombed alive in the monastery's ancient crypt, surrounded by the bones of saints and martyrs whose suffering had earned them places in heaven, where her stubborn love could transform into holy suffering that would benefit her soul's eventual salvation, and serve as example to other young women who might be tempted to value passion over prudence. The ceremony took place at midnight, attended only by the king himself and Mother Superior Agatha, whose hands shook as she performed the final rites over a princess who still breathed, and whose eyes still held the fire that had defied every attempt to extinguish it. Isabella was dressed in white silk that had been woven for her wedding dress, the fabric transformed from symbol of joy to shroud of sorrow, her hair crowned with flowers that would wither in the darkness she was about to enter, their beauty destined to fade in a tomb where sunlight would never penetrate. Her hands were folded over a wooden cross that Miguel had carved for her during their final meeting, the rough wood a stark contrast to the jeweled crucifixes that adorned the altar above, its simple lines speaking of love that needed no ornament to shine with divine light. As the stone slab slid into place above her tomb, sealing her forever in darkness absolute, and silence deeper than any she had known during her months of imprisonment, her last words echoed through the crypt like a curse that would outlive kingdoms and topple dynasties. Love is the only crown that cannot be removed by force, the only kingdom that death cannot conquer, the only treasure that increases when it is shared and never diminishes when it is tested by fire or flood or the wrath of kings who mistake power for wisdom. The official record stated that Princess Isabella had died of fever during her spiritual retreat, her body laid to rest with appropriate ceremony in the royal mausoleum where generations of nobles had found their final peace. But the servants whispered of sounds that emerged from the monastery crypt during certain nights when the moon was dark and the veil between worlds grew thin, soft singing that seemed to come from beneath the earth itself, voices harmonizing in defiance of death and stone and royal decree. They spoke of roses that bloomed wild and red around the crypt's entrance, flowers that grew from soil that should have been too holy to nourish such earthly beauty, their thorns sharp enough to draw blood from anyone who tried to pick them, their petals the exact shade of the blood that had been spilled in the name of love forbidden. Years passed like pages torn from a book of sorrows, and King Ferdinand's hair turned white with the weight of crowns that felt heavier each day he wore them, the gold seeming to burn his brow with memories of choices that could not be undone. The Duke of Aragon married another princess, one whose obedience had never been tested by love, and whose heart had been trained from birth to value duty above desire, and the eastern borders remained secure through treaties signed in ink rather than sealed with blood. But in the quiet hours before dawn, when even kings must face the ghosts that their choices have created, and the shadows that follow power like faithful hounds, Ferdinand would sometimes walk the monastery grounds and hear echoes of laughter that reminded him of the daughter he had buried to preserve the throne he would eventually leave to strangers who had never known the price of its purchase. The monastery of Santa Clara still stands today, its walls weathered by centuries, but its silence intact, broken only by the wind that moves through ancient stones like the breath of the dead, seeking release from earthly bonds that even death cannot break. Visitors speak of cold spots in the crypt where no cold should exist, areas where the temperature drops so suddenly that breath becomes visible even in summer heat, as if the very air remembers the chill of a tomb that holds more than bones and dust. The scent of jasmine blooms strongest near the tomb, marked only with a cross and the single word amor, carved deep enough to survive the erosion of time and royal shame, letters that seem to grow darker rather than lighter with each passing year, as if the stone itself weeps tears of remembrance for love that refused to die. Pilgrims come from distant lands to stand before the unmarked grave where a princess lies, buried beneath layers of stone and silence, their prayers mixing with whispers that seem to rise from the earth itself, like incense burning in invisible censers. They leave flowers that wither within hours, petals turning black as if touched by frost even in the warmth of spring. Yet the roses that grow wild around the crypt's entrance bloom eternal and red, their thorns sharp enough to draw blood from anyone who tries to pick them, their beauty a testament to love that death could not diminish. Local children dare each other to spend nights in the monastery grounds, their young hearts racing as they strain to hear the voices that older, wiser souls have learned to fear and reverence in equal measure. The current Mother Superior, Sister Magdalena, keeps detailed records of the phenomena that occur within the crypt, her careful handwriting documenting incidents that would strain the belief of those who have not walked these halls or knelt in prayer beside tombs that house more than earthly remains. She writes of candles that light themselves at midnight, flames that burn without consuming wax, their light casting shadows that move independently of any earthly source. Books in the monastery library open to passages about love and sacrifice, their pages turning as if guided by invisible hands that seek to share wisdom earned through suffering that transcends mortal understanding. During the anniversary of Isabella's entombment, the monastery experiences what Sister Magdalena describes as a spiritual awakening that affects every soul within its walls. Nuns who have maintained silence for decades suddenly begin to sing, their voices harmonizing in melodies that no earthly composer has ever written, notes that seem to rise from the stones themselves and soar toward heaven like prayers given wings. The sound carries beyond the monastery walls, reaching villages where mothers pause in their work to listen to music that speaks of love stronger than death, sacrifice more powerful than any earthly throne, devotion that makes mockery of the boundaries that separate the living from those who have passed beyond the veil. Scholars and theologians journey to Santa Clara, seeking to understand the phenomena that occur within its ancient walls, their learned theories crumbling like sand when confronted with experiences that defy rational explanation. They document temperature fluctuations that have no meteorological cause, light that appears without source, sounds that emanate from empty chambers where no living being walks or breathes. Some leave convinced that they have witnessed evidence of divine intervention, while others depart more troubled than when they arrived, their certainties shaken by encounters with forces that exist beyond the reach of human understanding or scientific measurement. The local bishop, a man whose faith has been tested by decades of service in parishes where poverty and suffering challenge belief in divine mercy, visits the monastery each year to investigate claims that strain the boundaries of church doctrine. He finds himself kneeling in the crypt where Isabella lies buried, his prayers interrupted by whispers that seem to come from the stones themselves, voices speaking of love that transcends death and devotion that makes saints of sinners. His official reports, carefully worded to avoid accusations of superstition or heresy, speak of spiritual phenomena that suggest the presence of souls who have found peace through suffering that purified rather than destroyed their capacity for divine love. The roses that bloom around Isabella's tomb have been studied by botanists who cannot explain their ability to thrive in soil that should be too poor to nourish such vibrant life, their roots somehow drawing sustenance from earth that contains more stone than nutrition. Chemical analysis reveals nothing unusual in their composition, yet they possess qualities that no other roses in the region display, their fragrance more intense than any hybrid developed through centuries of careful cultivation, their color so deep and pure that painters have attempted for generations to capture their essence without success. They bloom throughout the year regardless of season or weather, their petals remaining fresh even when snow covers the monastery grounds and frost kills every other growing thing. Local tradition holds that those who encounter the roses on the anniversary of Isabella's death will hear voices carried on the wind, words of love spoken in languages that predate the kingdoms that once ruled these lands. The villagers tell stories passed down through generations of couples who came to the monastery crypt seeking blessings for their own forbidden loves, pairs who faced obstacles that seemed insurmountable until they knelt beside the tomb where a princess chose death rather than life without love. They speak of marriages that were blessed with happiness beyond measure, of lovers who found courage to defy social conventions, of hearts that discovered strength to choose love over duty when the choice seemed impossible to make. The wooden cross that Miguel carved for Isabella has become the focus of particular reverence among those who visit the crypt, its simple lines somehow radiating warmth in a chamber where cold should reign eternal. The wood has not decayed despite centuries of exposure to moisture and time, its surface smooth as silk, beneath the fingers of pilgrims who touch it seeking hope for their own struggles with love and loss. Carved into one arm of the cross are two birds in flight, their wings spread wide as if soaring toward freedom that earthly bonds cannot contain, their forms so lifelike that visitors swear they have seen them move in the flickering light of votive candles. Medical professionals who have examined the accounts of healings reported near Isabella's tomb find themselves confronted with recoveries that challenge everything they understand about the human body's capacity for restoration. Diseases that should have been terminal have reversed their course after patients spent time in prayer beside the unmarked grave, their cellular structures somehow restructuring themselves in ways that medical science cannot explain or predict. The Church has investigated these claims with the thoroughness that precedes any consideration of beatification, their findings carefully documented but never officially acknowledged, the implications too profound for institutional acceptance. The genealogical records that trace the bloodlines of European nobility contain careful omissions where Isabella's name should appear, pages that have been removed or rewritten to eliminate any reference to the princess, whose love destroyed the carefully planned alliance between Castile and Aragon. Yet historians who study the period find traces of her existence in the margins of official documents, in letters between nobles who spoke in coded language about scandals that could not be openly discussed, in treasury records that show payments to the monastery of Santa Clara that far exceeded what would be required for a simple spiritual retreat. The truth lives in these fragments, like scattered pieces of a mosaic that reveals its full beauty only when assembled by those who understand the pattern of love and sacrifice that connects them. Archaeological investigations of the monastery grounds have revealed artifacts that suggest the site held significance long before Christian foundations were laid upon its ancient stones. Celtic burial mounds and Roman ruins indicate that this land has always been a place where the boundary between life and death grows thin, where souls seeking peace have gathered for millennia to find rest or redemption. The crypt where Isabella lies buried was constructed over a natural cave system that extends deep into the earth, chambers carved by underground streams that still flow in darkness far below the monastery floors, their water emerging in springs that locals consider blessed by the tears of those who have loved beyond measure. The historical significance of Isabella's story extends far beyond the personal tragedy of two lovers destroyed by royal ambition and social convention. Her defiance represents a moment when individual human desire challenged the fundamental structures that held medieval society together, when the voice of the heart spoke louder than the commands of crown and church. Scholars of political science recognize her rebellion as an early example of personal agency, asserting itself against institutional authority, a precedent that would echo through centuries of social revolution and reform. Her choice to die for love rather than live in bondage became a template for resistance that inspired countless others who faced similar impossible decisions between duty and desire. The psychological impact of Isabella's story on those who encounter it speaks to something profound in the human experience, a recognition that love represents the ultimate expression of individual identity and freedom. Modern therapists working with patients who struggle with family expectations and social pressure often find that Isabella's example provides a framework for understanding the courage required to live authentically in a world that demands conformity. Her willingness to accept death, rather than compromise her deepest convictions, offers a model of integrity that transcends the specific circumstances of medieval court politics, speaking to universal questions about the price of truth and the value of personal authenticity. The monastery's archives contain letters from visitors spanning 5 centuries, personal testimonies from individuals whose lives were transformed by their encounters with Isabella's story and the spiritual phenomena that surround her tomb. These documents reveal patterns that suggest her influence extends far beyond the confines of religious pilgrimage, touching lives in ways that secular psychology and traditional spirituality struggle to explain. Writers describe creative blocks that dissolved after spending time in the crypt, their imaginations freed by contact with a love so pure it burned through the barriers that separate inspiration from expression. Couples facing divorce report finding new depth in their relationships. Their perspectives shifted by witnessing the consequences of love denied and the beauty of devotion that refuses to compromise. The children who live in villages surrounding the monastery grow up with Isabella's story woven into their understanding of right and wrong, their moral compasses calibrated by the example of a princess who chose truth over comfort, love over safety, integrity over survival. Local schools teach her history not as a cautionary tale about the dangers of disobedience, but as an illustration of the courage required to live according to one's deepest convictions. These young people carry forward a legacy that transforms the meaning of nobility from an accident of birth into a choice of character, understanding that true royalty lies in the willingness to sacrifice everything for the values that define human dignity. The economic impact of pilgrimage to Isabella's tomb has sustained the local community for generations. Yet the commercialization that typically accompanies religious tourism has somehow failed to take root in this place where love proved stronger than death. Vendors who attempt to sell souvenirs find their wares ignored by visitors whose attention remains focused on internal transformations rather than external acquisitions. Hotels and restaurants serve pilgrims with simple fare prepared with unusual care, their owners understanding intuitively that those who come to honor Isabella's memory seek nourishment for souls rather than bodies, substance that satisfies hunger for meaning rather than mere physical appetite. The artistic representations of Isabella's story have evolved through centuries of interpretation, each generation finding new ways to express the timeless themes of love, sacrifice, and redemption that her life embodies. Medieval illuminated manuscripts depicted her as a martyr crowned with thorns, her suffering sanctified by religious iconography that transformed personal tragedy into spiritual triumph. Renaissance painters portrayed her as a romantic heroine, their canvases capturing the passion and beauty of forbidden love in colors that seemed to glow with inner light. Modern artists have found in her story a symbol of resistance against oppression, their works exploring themes of individual freedom and social justice that speak to contemporary struggles for equality and human rights. The scientific study of the phenomena reported at Isabella's tomb has attracted researchers from multiple disciplines, their instruments detecting anomalies that challenge conventional understanding of how consciousness interacts with physical reality. Electromagnetic field measurements reveal fluctuations that correlate with visitor reports of spiritual experiences, temperature variations that occur in patterns too complex to be explained by normal atmospheric conditions. Audio recordings capture sounds that human ears cannot perceive, frequencies that exist at the very edge of audible range, their wavelengths suggesting vibrations that originate from sources deeper than the monastery's foundations, perhaps from the cave systems that honeycomb the earth beneath the sacred ground. The theological implications of Isabella's continuing presence challenge traditional doctrines about the relationship between earthly love and divine purpose, forcing scholars to reconsider the boundaries between secular passion and sacred devotion. Her story suggests that human love, when pure enough and strong enough, can transcend the limitations that separate mortal existence from eternal truth, becoming itself a form of prayer that reaches heaven not through words, but through the depth of feeling that connects one soul to another. This understanding has influenced progressive theological movements that see romantic love as a pathway to divine understanding rather than an obstacle to spiritual development. The preservation of the monastery buildings themselves seems to occur through means that architects and engineers cannot fully explain. Stones that should have crumbled under the weight of centuries remaining strong as if reinforced by forces that exist beyond the reach of physics and chemistry. The mortar between the blocks stays fresh and binding, despite exposure to weather that has destroyed similar structures throughout the region. The walls standing straight and true, as if the very foundations draw strength from the love that lies buried in the earth beneath them. Restoration efforts consistently find that the building requires less maintenance than buildings half its age, its materials somehow renewed by contact with energies that flow through the sacred ground. The music that visitors report hearing in the crypt has been analyzed by musicologists who find melodies that follow harmonic progressions unknown to any earthly composition, chord structures that create emotional effects without precedent in human musical tradition. The voices that sing these otherworldly songs blend in harmonies that should be impossible for human vocal cords to produce, their tones carrying emotional content that bypasses intellectual understanding and speaks directly to the heart. Recordings of these phenomena capture only silence, as if the music exists in dimensions that electronic devices cannot access, audible only to consciousness that has been prepared through love or loss to perceive beauty that transcends material limitation. The final testimony comes from those who have experienced personal encounters with Isabella's presence in the crypt, their accounts remarkably consistent despite spanning centuries and cultures. They describe a figure dressed in white who appears to those who kneel beside her tomb in genuine need of guidance or comfort, her face radiant with compassion that encompasses all human suffering while transcending it through the power of love that death could not extinguish. She speaks without words, communicating through touch that heals wounds deeper than flesh, through eyes that reflect understanding of every heart that has ever chosen love over safety, truth over convenience, integrity over survival. Her message remains constant across all these encounters, that love is the only force in the universe capable of transforming tragedy into triumph, death into eternal life, individual suffering into collective redemption that lifts all humanity toward its highest potential. They tried to erase her with earth and silence, but Princess Isabella's love refused to die. Her tomb sings, her roses bleed red, and pilgrims still hear her name in the wind. For choosing love over loyalty, she paid the ultimate price, but her heart became legend. If her story haunted you, like this video, comment your thoughts on forbidden love, and subscribe for more stories that power tried to bury, but time refused to forget.